So, this morning we are halfway through our Ezra Build for Life series. And it's an exciting time to be part of the life of church. Each week we've been looking at a chapter in the book of Ezra and how God has been actively at work in the life of the Jewish exiles. And how that same God is actively at work in our lives, both personally and as a community. And so the messages are online. If you miss a week, please go and listen so that you understand the journey, the process that we are on. So I have a pet annoyance. I have several, but this one is about movies or TV programs that end in a cliffhanger. Okay, who does not like cliffhangers? No, I'm glad it's not just me. It messes with my head. I need closure. And if I watch something that doesn't end in closure, I sit there and out loud explain to those who are with me how it actually ends. This is what happens next. And Annette shares her creative thoughts to bring closure. Is there anyone quite like me? No. I knew it. I am unique. So last week, Ezra 4 sort of ended on a cliffhanger. It says, "Then the work on the house of God that is in Jerusalem stopped, and it ceased until the second year of the reign of Darius, king of Persia." Now, the period of time that it ceases is around 16 years. And what had happened is the people and the leaders of the land were discouraging the Israelites, frustrating their plans. It seems that it had all become too much to bear, too difficult, too time-consuming, too painful. We all know that sort of discouragement, don't we? Discouragement wears people down. So today, we are diving into chapters 5 and 6. And we're met with God sending two prophets, Haggai and Zechariah, to prophesy to the Jews. Haggai reminds the people that the Lord is the first priority. It's not time to worry about their houses, but time to put the Lord first. And this wasn't a stick and no carrot encouragement. God tells them that He will bless them if they make the temple their priority. And I mean, this is a biblical principle, yes? That if we prioritize God first, there is blessing and there is favor. Not necessarily straight away, but in the overarching journey of life. When we put God first, then things fall into place. Now, Zechariah's prophecy was directed to the spiritual condition of the returned exiles. He reminded them that God cares for them and the importance of keeping God at the center. And these two prophets made a phenomenal team. One of them, there was balance, one looking at the spiritual life and one looking at the building. They were a great team. And Ezra 5 verse 2 tells us that the leaders and people responded to the prophet's message. They set out to rebuild the house of God in Jerusalem. So what changed? Had the circumstances of the Israelites changed? Yes? No? Had anything changed at this point? Nothing. Nothing has changed. There is still resistance. You know, I often ask, why has God not taken out the annoying, negative talking people who were discouraging the Israelites? I mean, He could do that. But there's some learning to be done. And all of us need to hear this today. Currently, the Israelites are still surrounded by the same circumstances, but the people have made a decision to get back to work on the temple. How often do we find ourselves in awful, horrific circumstances, and we just give up and we walk away. It's too hard, it's too painful, it's too discouraging. In fact, Simon mentioned last week that it felt like as a church we take 2 steps forward and 1 step back. I mean, out of the 2 of us, I'm usually optimistic. And I sat there and I was thinking, doesn't he mean 1 step forward and 2 steps back? But Mark Millington nailed it the other week when he shared some of his story. How do you keep going in the difficult times? What was the answer? Perseverance. Perseverance. I mean, even the snail made it to the ark. Perseverance. After hearing the words of the prophets, being encouraged, being strengthened, they persevered. They went back to the task of rebuilding the temple after 16 years. They made that decision. And they all lived happily ever after. The end. Did they? Was it the end? No, by no means. I imagine it kind of feels like when you come out of something and it's been sorted, and you're thinking life is good, ministry is good, everything is well and rosy in the world, and then you get a phone call or a text or an email, and then that becomes the next thing you have to sort out. And so as they start to rebuild, the next thing to sort out is the governor of the region named Ta'atani. He turns up on the scene about the same time, and he wants to know who has commanded the Jews to build the temple and to finish this wall. Now, when I was a teenager, we would go to this awesome Christian talent event in Wellington called CTC, Capital Teen Convention. Anyone else? Yeah, I've talked with Karen about this. Anyone else go to those? It was by YFC. And it was an amazing weekend away. We got to perform on the Michael Fowler stage, find out more about God, and hang out with our friends without our parents. Yeah. And our Wanganui group was a collection of a variety of youth groups from the city. And we would travel down together. We'd leave at 5:30 a.m. in the morning. On a Saturday morning, we'd travel down and we'd stay out in the church hall in Johnsonville. It's a beautiful little Brethren church. And all the girls would sleep in the church and the boys would be in the freezing cold gym. Yeah. Now, it may surprise you that I was a young person who liked to talk into the wee hours of the morning. I mean, that's the best time to talk about deep and meaningful things with your friends, isn't it? Yeah? Yeah. But Jan Martin, who was the overseer of the groups, she was sick and tired of people talking. And she wanted names. Now, she didn't want names because she wanted to get to know me. She wanted names so she could report to our youth pastor and get us into trouble. So this guy, Ta'atani, he's exactly the same. He wants names. He wants the names of the ringleaders so that he can report them to King Darius. And then this beautiful verse hits. It says in verse 5, "But the eye of their God was upon the elders of the Jews, and they did not stop them until a report reached Darius, and the answer was returned by letter in reply to it." Back then, it's not going to be so instant. Talking months. David reminds us in Psalm 34, he says the same phrase, "The eye of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are attentive to their cry." You see, God sees when we go through difficult times. God sees us, and he cares about us so deeply. And this is an encouragement for every single one of us today. If we're going through difficult times, the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are attentive to their cry. God knows you, and God sees you today. So how do the Israelites respond this time to this resistance? Do they put their tools down? Do they wait another 16 years? Instead of stopping, the people kept on working. They decided not to wait for the king's reply. They were going to keep going and be obedient to God. They kept working and allowed God to work out what was happening next. I mean, this is an important key, to keep on keeping on. When we are doing God's work, others may try to delay, confuse, speak badly about us, frustrate us. But we can proceed with confidence. So Ta'atani, his name kind of reminds me of Tattletale. He sends the letter off to King Darius, which you can read verses 7 to 17. And in a nutshell, he is wanting to tattletale on the Israelites. He is wanting proof that King Cyrus of Babylon did indeed issue a decree to order the rebuilding of this temple. He tells the king everything that has transpired, that when questioned about who gave them permission to build and who the ringleaders are, that their response was this: we are the servants of God, of the God of heaven and earth, and are rebuilding the temple that was built many years ago, which a great king of Israel built and finished. It goes on with the whole backstory of how they ended up in Babylon and how they ended up at this particular point in time. And I encourage you to go and read those chapters. The exiles are super honest about their shortcomings, about how they rebelled against God and that God led them to exile. But don't you love how they don't call themselves Persians or Judeans or servants of King Darius. First and foremost, they are servants of God. They serve an audience of one. God is the ultimate authority for their work. And they aren't defiant, they aren't aggressive about it, they are just matter of fact. This is how it is. And then we move into chapter 6 and we see the reply from King Darius. Firstly, he makes the decree for a search of the royal archives. Now, this was not an easy task because the request is initiated in Judea, referred to Babylon, and the answer is found in the archives of a remote city in a different province. So, second pet annoyance for me, losing things. I greatly dislike losing things. Anyone else? Yes. I will always go back to the last place I remember having it, and I say, God, can you show me in my mind what happened next? This used to drive my children crazy. It's just think. Just pray and ask God, and He will show you. In 1967, all the places of Christian worship had been ransacked and closed in the city of Aden in Yemen, Middle East. And 25 years later, in 1993, the Grand Mufti had given permission to restore one place of worship. So Tom Hamlin, a missionary with OM International, tells this story. Despite having the Grand Mufti's permission to rebuild the Christchurch Church in Aden, we have no deed to prove ownership. So this was going to be a problem. That led to a long, dusty search through government archives. The deeds to 21 other churches in Yemen were found, but not for the church called Christchurch. So they asked people to fast and pray for a miracle. And this is what happened. A Muslim friend named Mustafa felt so bad about the way Tom was being treated by the government departments that he decided to go himself and ask if he could search for the deeds. He came away feeling very discouraged. But at the bottom of the steps to the government building, he saw a blind man begging. He put some money into the man's hands and was asked why he was there. Mustafa explained, and the man told him, "Before I became blind, I worked in the office. I know where those deeds are." Mustafa took the man back into the office, and the man directed the staff where to look. They pulled out a great old dusty register from the shelf, and in there was the deed for the church in Aden. God is good, yeah? And God is good to the Israelites, because it must have taken a long time for King Cyrus to find the decree of King Cyrus. But all that time it's taking, it's fantastic. Why? Because they carried on building. It's great. They continued building. This time, they don't stop. Now, remember when you were a kid and you would dob in your brother and sister? Yeah? And you would wait to see what the punishment might be. No? No, we were all good, weren't we? None of us would ever think of doing that. Goodness me, we wouldn't dob in our sibling and then wait to see what the outcome, what the consequence, what the punishment might be. Well, Mr. Tattletale, Taitani, is probably eagerly waiting for the response from King Darius. Maybe he's thinking, yes, now they are going to have to stop building this temple. So we pick up from verse 6 as the events unfold. Now then, Taitani, governor of Trans-Euphrates, and Shethar-Bozeni, and you other officials of that province, stay away from there. Do not interfere with the work of this temple of God. Let the governor of the Jews and the Jewish elders rebuild this house of God on its site. I mean, isn't that cool? It's great. Keep away. Leave the work and leave the workers alone. Let the house of God be rebuilt. I mean, could this get any better? Could this get any better? Yes, it does. Let's read on. Verse 8. Moreover, I hereby decree what you are to do for these elders of the Jews in the construction of the house of God. Like when I was reading this, I was like, man, God is so cool. He's just like, oh, just so cool. This is what the king says to them. Their expenses are to be paid fully out of the royal treasury from the revenues of Trans-Euphrates, so that the work will not stop. Whatever is needed, young bulls, rams, male lambs for burnt offerings to the God of heaven, and wheat, salt, wine, and olive oil, as requested by the priests in Jerusalem, must be given them daily without fail, so that they may offer sacrifices pleasing to the God of heaven and pray for the well-being of the king and his sons. I mean, obviously he wanted a bit of a perk in there, didn't he? It's like, pray for me. I mean, this is amazing. The work fully funded by you, Mr. Tattletale. And the worship, the sacrifices are to be supplied fully by you, Mr. Tattletale. We could just stop there, couldn't we? It's fantastic. Yeah? What a great outcome. But it's almost as if the king wants to make totally sure that these orders are going to be followed. So he adds this on. There's only one little kid in. It's a bit gruesome. Furthermore, from verse 11, I decree that if anyone defies this edict, a beam is to be pulled from their house, and they are to be impaled on it. And for this crime, their house is to be made a pile of rubble. May God, who has caused his name to dwell there, overthrow any king or people who lifts a hand to change this decree or to destroy this temple in Jerusalem. I, Darius, have decreed it. Let it be carried out with diligence. Is anyone, like, I've got pins and needles, not pins and needles, I've got goosebumps. I'm like, man, that is God. That is the God we worship. That is the God we serve. He is for his people. He is for us. The final verses of this chapter close with the temple completed, the temple dedicated, and the Passover is once again celebrated in the temple. And this is a beautiful picture of God's providence. Providence is the protective care of God. Romans 8:28, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. God is working things out, but it is his perfect plan. It is his perfect timing. So what can we learn? What do we learn from these passages? What principles has God set in place that we can glean from? I mean, there's so much. Firstly, what looked like an opportunity for fear and a reason to quit was actually the path to success. Imagine what had happened if they'd quit again. They just walked away, gone back to their houses. How easy it is to look at our hardships and our difficulties and to quit the work that God has called us to do. You see, the resistance, the discouragement, the difficulties. I mean, talking with other pastors recently, it's like we walk around with a huge target on our backs. It's hard. Now, I don't want to sound like a press on, take it to the next level. Yes, you can do this kind of preacher, because you can't do this. I can't do it. You can't do it. We can only do it if that is what God wants us to do. Which leads to the next principle. If God is in it, and if we persevere through it, then we will find favor. We will. The challenge for us is, are we a community of faith prepared to do this? And some of you are ready. Yes, let's do what God's calling us to do. And others, well, we've been here before. We've got plans drawn up in 2008, 2011, 2018, and 2020. Nothing happened. We failed. No, we did not fail. This account in Ezra reminds us that past failures do not need to be the end of the story, but the beginning of something new. And we are all servants of the God of heaven and earth. And we have been charged with worshiping and serving him. God is going to accomplish all that is in his heart's desires. No one can stand against that. A timely reminder from William Carey, who was a Baptist missionary. He once said this: expect great things from God and attempt great things for God. Are we ready to expect great things from God? Yes? Yeah. And are we ready to attempt great things for God? If we come up with a vision that we think we can do, then I don't think that's from God. A vision has to be something bigger than we can do ourselves. We are not going back to self-reliance. We are going forward with God, what he has for us, something so big that only he can orchestrate all the things that will eventuate for the final whatever it looks like. Only God can do that. I bet the exiles had no idea that the reply from the king would be so generous. They would have probably been quite happy if they could just get on with doing what they were doing. Yeah? Great, we've got a letter. He says we can proceed. They would have been quite satisfied, I'm sure, with that. I mean, yeah, that's great. We can build our temple. But God, so much bigger, blesses incredibly, orchestrates, changes the heart of a king, brings favor onto those people. And I believe that he can do that for us. But we can't do it ourselves. It has to be God's plan and God's provision. And so we're going to close our service this morning declaring the words, I'm going to see a victory, because it's going to happen. God will prevail. God's plan will prevail. Yeah?